What is up, everybody? So I'm back with episode 2 of my Maritime Wrestling journey. We have gone all the way back to the beginning, and I believe I left the last episode off on September 2nd, 2001, when I attended a WWF host show, came home, and then decided to launch the first ever Maritime Wrestling website. Now, it wasn't called Maritime Wrestling at the time. It had the worst name ever. I called it Halifax Extreme Wrestling. HEW all the way, baby. Where that name came from, I don't know. I was a giant Extreme Championship Wrestling fan, so that clearly had some sort of influence on it. And I live in Halifax, and I wanted to really somehow promote or figure out how to get more attention on the local pro wrestling scene. At that time, for me it was just Halifax, which would later become all of Maritime Wrestling. I really wanted to promote Maritime Wrestling as a whole. But I'm going to be completely honest in this podcast. I've said most of this stuff over the years, or at least a lot of it over the years in various interviews and things that I've done. And when I launched this last weekend, I got a whole whack of messages from people asking me, what are you going to talk about? Are you going to talk about this? Are you going to talk about that? You're not going to talk about that, are you? What about this? What about that? What about this topic? And the answer to all of that is yes. If I was directly involved in something, I'm absolutely going to talk about it. The gloves are off. There's no holding back. If I was directly involved in anything, good, negative, positive, amazing, whatever the case may be, I'm absolutely going to talk about it. So I said a couple of times that my goal was to promote Maritime Wrestling as a whole. PEI, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, really what Newfoundland had a few wrestling companies, but at this point in time, I didn't really know anybody that did anything in Newfoundland. So instead of Atlantic Canadian Wrestling, I just called it Maritime Wrestling, because everybody that I was speaking to, talking to, getting information from, just knew stuff about the Maritimes. So that's all I was learning about. But my initial goal was, I had one purpose. People tell me now, and it's true, that you're biased towards your friends. Yep, 100% biased towards my friends. It's not a secret. I don't hide it. I don't deny it. And I'll always be biased towards my friends. My single goal when I started the website, at the time I started it, was to promote Lincoln Steen and Scott Savage, was to promote people that I knew and became friends with at the time. Those were the two people, the two local pro wrestlers that I knew and became friends with before anybody else. I knew absolutely nothing about the professional wrestling industry, but I wanted to get Lincoln Steen and Scott Savage. At the time, he wrestled as Jeremiah Delinquent, just JDL, just in case you remember either name. My sole goal was to promote them. And then a little while later, Sarah Stock joined that group when she came out the following June, and then Tony Armstrong. And that was it for years. I did promote all of Maritime Wrestling, but my main goal during the beginning years was to only advertise those four people: Lincoln Steen, Sarah Stock, JDL, and Tony Armstrong. Tony Armstrong, of course, started out in backyard wrestling as Mr. Ego. Used to come out in a powdered blue dress shirt, I think it was. I don't think he had a tie, but he wore the khakis and sneakers. Horrendous. But you could tell there was potential. I only saw him backyard wrestle maybe 4 or 5 times, and I was like, man, this guy is too good to be in this particular situation. be wrestling here. So I got him to leave, and I got him involved with Devin Chittick and mainstream wrestling early on in 2002. But yeah, that was my main goal when I started, was to promote those 4 people, and it didn't matter to me what else I put on my website on Halifax Extreme Wrestling. I only wanted to promote those 4 people. And to this day, and I don't hide it, there are specific people that you won't see on my social media, and there's specific people that you will see a lot of on my social media. It's my social media. Is it called Maritime Wrestling? Absolutely. But I am the one that got the name, and just because it's titled Maritime Wrestling, I will promote golf on that page if I choose to. That's just how I look at things. You can disagree with it. You can think it should be for everybody. But I always tell people that think it should be for everybody is start your own. Promote your own. You can start Maritime Wrestling too, for all I care. Doesn't matter. Go out there, start your own Atlantic Canadian Wrestling page. Start your own Maritime Wrestling page. Do whatever it is you want. Promote the crap out of it. I hope you become bigger than my social media ever was, because I want the maritime wrestling scene to continue to grow. And if somebody can come along and do it better than I did, by all means do it. I would love to see it, because I'm not doing it forever. Will I always click share on stuff? Sure. But I have no intention of spending the rest of my days living on Facebook and Instagram and X, doing everything that I do for the local maritime wrestling scene. Will I always do it to some extent? Probably, but not like I do now. Let's get back into it. September 2nd, 2001, I launched the very first maritime wrestling website, Halifax Extreme Wrestling, and I start reaching out to people. I start emailing, and trying to get, there was no the only instant messaging program, I think at that time, was ICQ. I might be wrong, but that was the one I was using. Started using that for the people that had that, getting information, getting pictures. Kathy Yetman, the queen of maritime wrestling, helped me out tremendously. So I started doing that. And I'd put up bios of everybody. I tried to find events that were happening. There wasn't a lot of promotions running at the time. There was really only 2 that I knew about at the time that I followed. IHW wouldn't come along until years later. UCW, as we know it, wouldn't come along till years later. I didn't start promoting shows until 2 years later. Red Rock Wrestling didn't become a thing till, oh my God, 8 years later. So none of those promotions existed. And so there wasn't a lot to promote. Real Action Wrestling ran a ton of shows. Mainstream Wrestling at that time, didn't run a lot of shows. They did run some, and they would go on to run a gajillion shows when you count in the tours they did of Newfoundland and Labrador. I don't think there's anybody that ever ran a tour longer than some of those mainstream wrestling tours of Newfoundland and Labrador. They were 34 days in a row or something insane. That's an actual number. It was 32, 33, 34 something days in a row that they would run. It was bananas. It was bananas back then. So I started doing that, and then I get a message sometime in September, early October 2001, asking me if I wanted to come. Man, I don't even remember the name of this school. It's funny because I drove by it not too long ago and took a picture in front of it. It was Lincolnstein's High School. And he's like, I'm doing a show with, I can't remember if Steen was promoting it or if it was a mainstream wrestling thing that Devin was promoting through Steen. I don't remember the exact intricacies of it, but there was a show being promoted at Lincolnstein's High School, mainstream wrestling, and he asked me if I wanted to come film it. I'm like, I absolutely do. This was the first time someone reached out to me to come film a show. So I was super excited to now get asked to come film a show for Lincoln Steen for Mainstream Wrestling in Lincoln Steen's high school. I was pumped. So sometime between now and that show was October 17th, 2001. Sometime between September the 2nd and October the 17th, I got contacted by Mike Zink, who was that Grand Prix co-promoter during the early part of 2001, and he asked me if I wanted to come with him to the show. He had the ring stored at his place. We were getting the ring truck, or he was getting the ring truck. Scott Savage, JDL, was going to pick me up. We were going to go to Mike Zink's place and get in the ring truck and go to the show in wherever it was. Milford? I want to say Milford. I don't know if that's right. Lincoln Steen's high school. That's where we were going. And so we get there, and we have to take the ring. I didn't know I was going to have to do this. Clearly didn't care. I would have carried the ring piece by piece to this show. That was like an hour away or whatever. So we get there, and the ring is in a shed that is seemingly sunk into swamp. So me and Scott, this is my first ring crew experience ever. Me and Scott, I would have wore rain boots if I knew I was going to have to do this. We, like mid-shin deep swamp, are carrying the ring out of this guy's shed and into the ring truck. It was disgusting. We both got soaked. I didn't know what to think of anything. Scott was a little bit upset. But we did it, just me and him. Put this ring in the back of the ring truck, and off we went to Lincoln Steen's high school, soaking wet. I really wish I would have brought a fresh pair of socks. But you know, that's how the cookie crumbles. So we get there, I'm stacking chairs, I'm setting them up, we're putting the ring together, we're getting everything ready for this show. And this particular ring was different. I don't think there's any rings right now that go together like this one. The posts had holes in them for the ropes. So there was a chain on the end of the ropes that you had to pull through this hole on the post and then drop a pin in on the other side so that the ropes stayed tight. So you would have 3 or 4 guys pushing the rope. There was no like crank system. You would have 3 or 4 guys pushing the rope into the corner, and then you would drop the pin into the back of the post. And that's how the ropes got tightened. It was absolutely insane. But rings were different back then. Clearly. I don't know if that ring's still around. I haven't seen it. It was actually the ring that it got some work done to it, but it was the original Wildman Academy ring. It was the first ring I used at Maritime Cup 1. We got rid of that chain pin dropping thing and had an actual like hook put on, and you could tighten the turnbuckles correctly. But yeah, so during that time, during October 17th, 2001, I was setting chairs up, setting the ring up. I just driven there in the ring truck. Lincoln Steen looks at me. We're all just like hanging out around the ring. He's like, you know, having you around is just like having a new Scott around, meaning Scott Savage, JDL. Scott got into the business the same way, setting up shows, driving around in the ring truck, driving the guys around, just basically doing whatever was asked of him. So we all just laughed about it. And that was the very first time the New Scott name ever came and was ever said. It has nothing to do with Nova Scotia. It has nothing to do with anything else. People have asked all over the years, oh, it must have to do with this, that, or the other thing. There's no named after Scott Savage, because I got into the wrestling business the same way that he did. And Lincoln Steen just said it in passing as a joke during this show, or during the setup of this show. So it was, that's where it came from. And then it wasn't really said much after that particular moment until we went on the first ever Team New Scott road trip on Remembrance Day, November 11th, 2001 to Cape Breton, but we'll get to that later. This show in Lincolnstein's hometown, Lincolnstein's high school, drew approximately 13 people. There was not a lot. So the first Grand Prix show I went to, 13, 14 people. Not a lot of folks. Relaxing Wrestling, drawing amazing. That mainstream show in Bridgewater that got canceled because of the Big X had like 1,500 people there. There was a ton, I don't know. This next show, 13 people. So my range for independent wrestling audiences was all over the place. You never knew what to expect. But I didn't think it of as like, this sucks. I was like, how do we get more people? And that's all I ever wanted to do. I never wanted to be a wrestler. I never wanted to be Stone Cold Steve Austin. I always said I wanted to be Vince McMahon. Could change that now, though, I guess. I always wanted to be Triple H. I always wanted to be the promoter. I always wanted to be the person responsible for getting the audience to particular shows. I wanted to be the reason why people knew Maritime Wrestling existed and came to the events. That's what I wanted to be. I don't want to be a wrestler now. I never wanted to be the star. I don't want to be the star. The fact that my social media as me blew up as me and not just the Maritime Wrestling portion of it was never the goal. I wanted the Maritime Wrestling portion of it to explode, but people followed me. Well, I ended up getting 2 URLs, newscott.com and maritimewrestling.com. 0 people used maritimewrestling.com, and a whole whack of people used newscott.com. Started as a joke, but it became its own thing. But my goal was to never make myself this big following. It was to make it towards Maritime Wrestling. Of course, that changed over the years, but the initial goal was never me. I don't want the spotlight now. I specifically tell my ring announcer at shows, don't mention me, mention this person, that person, and the other person. I don't want any recognition whatsoever. It's not about me. It's about the guys in the ring putting on a show for the fans that come ringside. It's about my sponsors. It's about the place that we're in that's allowing me to put on this show. It's not supposed to be about me. I get asked every other show, will you have a match? Can you imagine how many tickets will sell if you had a match? The reaction, blah, blah, blah. The answer is always no. It came from a passing joke from Lincolnstein to whatever it became through Maritime or Canadian wrestling. Like, I have some funny stories involving some fairly big stars coming to the Maritimes, and the only thing, this isn't me bragging, it's wild to me, the only thing they knew about Maritime Wrestling, they didn't know about me, but they knew about the name New Scott, and that's extraordinarily flattering to me. Like, these guys are like, who's New Scott? What's New Scott? Do you work for him? Like, the amount of questions, and we'll get into it over the series, that I got from people when they came to the Maritimes about who New Scott is extraordinary. It's very cool, and it's very cool. It's very flattering, and I'll never be able to thank people enough for that, but it's just because of the amount of work I think I put in during the early days and still continue to do. Do I do as much as I did back then? No, but that's because I was building the information database of Maritime Wrestling. So when I wasn't at my regular job, that is all I did. That's all I did was research Maritime Wrestling. I used to go to the library and look up newspapers. I think Tony Armstrong even came with me a few times. Might be wrong on that, but somebody came with me. I went to the library to look up like old newspapers, to find dates and results of shows that happened. Absolutely anything information-wise I could find. I would sit there and scan everything, because where else am I going to find it? Like, there was hardly an internet at that time. So I was reading books. I was scanning newspapers at the public library. I was messaging old-time wrestlers that were here to get any information possible. And do I do that now? No, because it's already done. So the amount of work I did back then, I think that's why the amount of people that knew who the name was, didn't know me, just knew the name from the website where all of that information was stored, was because there was nothing like it. There's all kinds of websites that came after, like the Online World of Wrestling, that covered everything worldwide. I could not imagine the amount of work those folks did to put that website together. I'm going to assume it was more than one person, but maybe it wasn't. But even still, even if it was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people, the amount of people the Online World of Wrestling must have had working 24/7 to get that information for every promotion everywhere would have been bananas. I actually talked to one of the guys that worked on that website a fair bit. He lived in the Valley, I think. And we used to exchange information back and forth. But yeah. So the website I had, it was the only thing like it for Maritime Wrestling at the time. There's a few websites out there now where the information came from mine, whether they know it came from mine or not. It did. Them knowing my name was so flattering. And a lot of that over the years, not just the work I put into the website, it would have to do with Sarah Stock as well, because I ran some of her social media and she was super popular all over the world. And the website URL was sarah.newscott.com. So that also played a huge part into why people knew the New Scott name, because she was super famous in Mexico, Japan, all over the world, would go on to be a producer and trainer in WWE and NXT, and is now a producer agent for AEW. That website doesn't exist anymore. We have a Facebook page for her, and she has an Instagram and an X account. But yeah, before all of that existed, it was sarah.newscott.com. And so that's why a lot of people knew that name as well. A lot of people used to contact me through that website to get in touch with her for bookings. I've had like TV show requests for her come through that page. Still every now and again, it hasn't happened recently, but people still have the email. The email I had on that website still active. So, and they all go to the same place now. Which is super thankful that somebody invented a way to do that. So I still randomly will get an email for Sarah, but most of them go through the Facebook page now. But yeah, so it was thanks to her that a lot of people knew about my website for Maritime Wrestling through her website that I had. It was really a group effort. Lincoln Steen helped a ton back then. Scott Savage was always super quiet, didn't really say anything online. The fact that I got him to do as many interviews as I did is still shocking, because he was super quiet, didn't say anything. He was the guy, him and Sarah, when we first started traveling to the States, when I first started traveling to the States, it was with them. They would be like, the most important thing you can do, if a wrestler asks you about their match, sit down, shut up, say nothing. And if they keep asking, be like, it was great. I loved it. It was fantastic. Never give advice on a pro wrestler's match back then when you're first getting in. It's a little bit different now. I'm still not the most comfortable doing it. A lot of people come and ask because it's on my shows, etc. And I will still be like, if Steen's next to me or if somebody more veteran-like is next to me, I will ask them, did you see the match? What do you think? Blah, blah, blah. But I will give the opinions of what I thought. But it's still a very uncomfortable thing to do. I don't believe it's my place to be like, that effing sucked. You're terrible. That's not my place. I don't go out there and do it. So why is it my place to be criticized? That's just how I look at it. Well, that's basically where the New Scott name came from. I'm going to get into a lot more show-specific things as this series goes on. I'm going to get into a lot more of answering questions. They are filing in like crazy. So if you have a question, you want me to answer it, doesn't matter what it is. I'll talk about whatever you want. As long as I'm directly involved or had something to do with the situation, or you just want to know my thoughts on the situation, shoot me the question. I'll answer whatever you want. Good, bad, interesting. Get that stir stick out there, and do my thing. So, got any questions? Let me know. I got a bunch already. But that's where the name New Scott came from. Next episode, we'll get into a little bit more detail of, the first road trip to Cape Breton. And who was in the audience back in 2001? And who was in the ring back in 2001? And who was trained and who wasn't trained? And what this show was about that really kicked off. We weren't called Team New Scott yet, but that is definitely what kicked off the trio that would later become Team New Scott. Was a road trip to Cape Breton, Whitney Pier, Ukraine Hall, November 11th, 2001. Let's go. Hope you enjoyed this episode. I'll see you again soon.